Fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. You are all not on your video, and if you don't want to have video showing, that's absolutely fine. But I want to extend a very, very warm welcome to all of you for joining our webinar in conversation with today. Absolutely delighted to be speaking to the wonderful Helena Clayton about her work. So before I get stuck in with asking Helena to introduce herself, please feel free to use the chat function. If there are any questions that you'd like to raise, then we'll either save them to the end or we'll pick them up as we go through. And I know Helena's very open to taking your thoughts and your questions as we go through. So, dear lady, over to you. Tell us a little bit about you.
I'm just noticing first off that while I'm really used to speaking to groups in person, I'm still not used to speaking to groups online. Anyway, it's all a big experiment, isn't it? So it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. So my work is in leadership development and has been for 20 or so years, designing and running leadership programs, coaching, facilitation. But over the last 3 or 4 years, I've been researching, writing about, speaking about love and the role it could or should play in organizations. And I'm taking a fairly bold stance on it. I'm advocating for it really strongly. And I'm also holding fast to using the word love, not kindness or compassion, essential as those are, obviously. So yeah, I'm really holding out for love.
That's great. And I think actually, I mean, it is very brave, because for those of us who are, you know, sort of HR and OD practitioners, the word love can sort of fill you with both joy and absolute dread, and have us thinking about relationships and work policies. Right. So it is really important that you are taking this this activist stand. I'm really interested though in what drew you to the idea of love in the workplace and why we should explore it.
It was the contrast between what I was seeing when I worked in organizations. At worst, I was seeing organizations that were brutal and harsh. And at best, that's not quite true. At best, there are some fantastic, loving organizations, but mostly at best, it might be described as benign neglect or just thoughtless or uncaring. And that was not okay for me at all. But in parallel to my 20 years in corporate work, I've also done a lot of pretty deep dive, sometimes radical personal growth work. And what I kept seeing there, time and time and time again, is when people had pain or struggle or difficulty or fears, whatever they brought, when it was met with love, there was healing. Not it was healed, but there was healing. And I saw the fierce potency or power of love there, and I just was thinking, well, the same people who come on these deep dive workshops are the same people who put on a suit and pitch up in a big corporate office. So it's like, So I started to get really interested then in the crossover. How come we create workplaces that are so sterile, and yet there's all this amazing richness in us. So that's when I started to think, how can love find its way into organizations?
Absolutely. And you've done some really interesting research, haven't you? Could you share a little bit about, I suppose there's a couple of things for me in the research. It's how you went about it and what have you, but I'm really curious to understand how you scoped out this notion of love in the context of leadership.
Yeah. So in 2018, I did a piece of research, and it's available. We'll send you a link.
Great, thank you.
And it was published in 2019 and won a research award, which was great. What I did for that piece of work is I didn't define love. I didn't say, this is my definition of love. Does it have a place in the workplace? I intentionally said, I'm not defining it. Let's work with what you think or feel is love at work. I'm very conscious that, to your point, actually, Karen, it's so taboo or weird or just not okay to bring conversations about love in the workplace. So I'm all about, to the extent I can, trying to find a way to talk about love that is robust, that is useful, and that is far away from the associations people might have with religion or with romance or with sentimentality. I want to see if there's a really useful, robust way that we can talk about love in organisations. Yeah.
And as you went through the research, were there trends that emerged or commonalities of themes that emerged?
Well, I think there was a stark thing of interest, which again builds on what we're talking about. Something like 94% of respondents, and they were self-selecting, right? Because they volunteered to complete a survey on love. 94% of people said love really matters in organisations, and gave so many examples of with more love. So personally, I'd be better, I'd shine brighter. There was great data on there'd be more collaboration, because when I feel safe, I don't have to fight or compete with others. So there's something about greater collaboration. But even through to people said I'd feel more freed up to be innovative and creative, and we could solve some of the really knotty, gnarly problems with more love. So the data, it was really beautiful. But 30% or so said love matters, but it doesn't belong in organisations. It's not okay to talk about it. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't feel okay to talk about it.
So it was that they didn't feel okay to talk about it, rather than them saying it just shouldn't be on the agenda, full stop.
Right. There's a strong kind of, it's love doesn't belong. Well, there is definitely a love doesn't belong in organisations.
Wow.
And I think that 30% is pretty low, because if this is a self-selecting group, they were willing to engage in a conversation about love. If we took, a random sample, I think that would be much, much higher.
Yeah. It is really interesting, isn't it? I'm interested in your sense on this. So do you have a sense that the reason why people don't think it belongs is that there's this notion that love is fuzzy and soft, and it would get in the way of productivity, which we don't really understand anyway? Right. is my personal experience. But do you think it's bound up in that?
I do. I think we've created organisations that are overwhelmingly focused on efficiency and productivity and metrics and KPIs and the rational side of us, at the expense of the emotional, our emotional lives, our souls, our the other parts of us. So I think we've way overdeveloped that side of us and of our organisation. So I think that's absolutely. But Kenneth Williams, the actor, said, "Love is the most awful invasion of privacy." And I love
that's amazing, isn't it? That's amazing. Yeah.
Because also I get it. It's like, well, look, I go to work. So this also speaks to why we work and the nature of work. I go to work to give you my 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever I give. Yeah. You're not having the inside of me. It's like, I already give you so much. You're not having the deep inside of me. You can, no. So I think there's something really understandable about the way we seek to protect ourselves in organisations that are not very human.
It's fascinating. I was smiling when you said soul. I smiled because, as you know, we were speaking with Steve Marshall on Wednesday.
Yes.
And he and I have been doing some work together with some colleagues who have become very dear friends over the sort of the late spring and summer, and we're all in this sort of field. But actually, the language that we have been using during COVID, we've been talking about alchemy, we've been talking about magic, we've been talking about spirit, we've been talking about soul, compassion, love, and all of these extraordinary things. And I think it is so fascinating, isn't it, that people do, people will want to save themselves if they don't feel safe. And some of what you've talked about as well, I think, is fascinating from the perspective of psychological safety and work around trust and sort of Amy Cuddy. And I'm just, keen to get your sense as well of how you think love feeds into trust and psychological safety. Do you think, Helena, it's part and parcel of a set of, I'm going to use the word emotions, and I know that's not the right word. Is it a set of something that needs to be in place altogether to really make people feel that it's okay to talk about love? Does that make sense?
I do. It's like you're sort of asking, what are the preconditions that need to exist maybe in organisations that can allow us to talk about love? And I think psychological safety is bang at the heart of it. I think you're absolutely right. It's like, what could, as a leader or anybody in an organisation, what would it take for me to introduce the word love into a business meeting, into a coffee I'm having with a senior partner or my team member? I think that's a huge question. It's like, what needs to happen? So and then that takes us to what kind of organisational cultures are we creating? Not just what's the leadership responsibility, but what part do we all, each one of us, play in co-creating the culture we've ended up with? So I think psychological safety is right there. And I think, if I think of a leadership role, if I think of OD, HR, no matter where you sit, there's boldness that's needed to risk being the first one in a team to use the word love. And I wonder then, what are the preconditions for one individual to find the courage or the chutzpah or the kind of sod it to just see what happens? Because you're saying that you're having conversations that use words like spirit or soul. I bet people are responding, right?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. And certainly, Leatham and I talk about this a lot, because obviously, compassion and love and kindness have been important to Leatham forever and ever, and me too. But at times it has felt like we were sort of secretly talking to each other about these forbidden things. And Leatham's brave anyway. As you talk about that, people absolutely respond. And I think it's one of the reasons why we have wanted to have these sets of discussions with people who join us today, because it's so important we start to change the language on the ground level. And it will feel very uncomfortable initially, but it is necessary that we do this so that we can shift the profession and shift the nature and the quality of the discussion. I'm really interested to hear from you in terms of how we land this on the ground, and perhaps some examples of organisations where you would describe it as a loving place and what that feels and looks like to people.
Yeah, that's interesting. So to see if I can make a link and also remember the question. So
don't
so there's
worry.
something around if we can risk using words like spirit or soul or compassion or love. My belief, and I think evidentially I've experienced this, is that people respond. So it can feel like a big leap to use a word like love, but actually I notice that some people it will switch off for sure, but for so many others a light goes on. They lean forward, they say, tell me more. I think we have a deep thirst for conversations about love and beauty and compassion and soul work. I think it's a dried up part of us for many of us, and I think I think it needs watering and tending and growing. But you asked about what it looks like in practice, and I think the assumption is that love is soft. And in the research I did, people's the most commonly used word was care. So it's like care. So the bucket was care, nurture, compassion, support, for sure. Big style. But it's also true that some organisations that we assume are caring and supportive. I was talking to somebody in the NHS the other day, and to my utter surprise, she said yes. And when I worked there, wherever there was, it was brutal and savage. So we can't necessarily assume
Yeah.
that a culture that looks loving or caring is.
Yeah.
But also I think love is so much more than that. So I've written in a blog about the relationship between love and anger, which is around anger helps us connect with what matters to us. It helps us work out what is important and what we want to protect. And it helps us connect with a very strong no. So I think leadership or an HR or an OD role in organizations is to really work out what is not okay and fight for it or fight to protect it. So I think also loving organizations are those that take a stand and call out behavior that's not okay, that's harming or hurting people.
Yeah, I think that's really lovely. And it leads us into, Martin's asked a fabulous question. And it's something you said earlier. So you said there was healing versus it was healed. And Martin's just asking if we can talk a little bit about that, because it is a distinction, isn't it? So, and there's also something around sometimes healing. We assume it's a beautiful, benign experience, and actually it's not benign at all for some people. So could you talk a little bit about that, about this sort of this notion of healing?
It is interesting. I wish I could remember, and I totally can't. Somebody wrote a year or so where I was reading something about why can't organizations be places of healing? I was thinking, oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, wow.
Oh, 50 reasons, but great question. Because if they are places that harm, and many are, then I think we do have a responsibility to see, okay, well, in what ways, if life does us harm, which it also does, how could organizations at least be like a doctor and, you know, do no harm? How could it also contribute to some form of healing or regenerative practice? So it's a lovely question. And I think it also opens up wide that question. What do we see as the responsibility of leadership, OD? And I think to date, there's been a really narrow syllabus. You know, I don't know. I think of leadership, you know, you'd probably see change management, creating a vision, morale of staff, whatever. But actually, I think the syllabus for leadership, say, is changing and is being called to change. So what if love was a core competency? What if leaders thought, in what way might I bring healing? However odd or weird or conceptual it might be, it's like, actually, let's play in that territory a bit more now.
Yeah, and I think actually it would be really liberating for leaders if we did that. So as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about, you know, across the local government space, I probably won't get any plaudits for this, but there's probably about 5-6 chief execs that I would think, they really get the people agenda. And I don't actually mean that at all. I mean, they're really human, and I, you know, can see their humanity, and I understand that they feel emotion. And I think it would be liberating, surely, for them if we encouraged them to talk about this thing, knowing that people will respond warmly.
Really, and also, you know, I only know that the extent to which I am loving, and it's severely tested and limited at times, believe me, but the extent to which I am is directly linked to the therapeutic, I suppose, healing work that I've done through my personal growth work. So again, it's a theory of provocation. It's like, actually, how many of us really do need to how many of us need to do some good inner work, whether it's with a coach or deeper, to get out of our own way, so that we can be more loving, whatever that looks like.
Well, another provocation based on what you're suggesting there, I think, is, you know, how the hell do we use our organisation's training budgets? You know, so typically, I mean, there's always, you know, there's usually two things that happen. When there's a crisis, the first thing that goes is your training budget, which never quite feels sensible to me. But then the second one is, you know, we don't necessarily look at developing inner do we? That's not the work that organisations will typically focus on for their people. We'll focus on the things that, you know, can I train somebody to, you know, to be a mental health first aider? And I'm not saying that's not important, that absolutely is. But, you know, for some of what we're trying to teach people, there is a really deep connection to our inner selves and our inner world. And if we don't make that connection, we're going to miss a trick bigly, aren't we?
And this is sort of linked to love. Well, it is actually. I came across a superb paper, we'll share it, about how, about slow trauma. So the theory of adverse childhood experiences, which can be as, you know, become as regular as economic hardship or poverty, your parents divorcing, but obviously ramps up to physical or sexual abuse, for example. But the literature says that between 40 and 60% of us have experienced some form of slow trauma. And that's, you know, a thing in itself. But two things. One is slow trauma can get in the way of us connecting with love. But the most interesting thing of this, from this paper, was that organizational change triggers or re-triggers the wounds that people, adults, walk around with from their slow trauma from their childhood. It's an excellent paper, and I'll share it. So yeah, most of us are walking around with a lot of stuff.
That's incredible, because it also ties in, and I've got a lovely question for you in a minute from Stephen. Hello, Stephen. This notion of cell memory. So when you're talking about slow trauma and the fact that it can take years and years to come up with, there's an amazing. He's a biologist actually. He's called Bruce Lipton, and there's a wonderful book that I will share with everybody. And it's this notion that every single cell in our body has memory, Helena. It doesn't matter how small the atom, but you know, we carry that, and very often we're carrying it unconsciously, and you do sort of wonder about, you know, if we've got all of this stuff, you know, and energy is alive and living, and it's transferable in ways that we don't even think about. So you know, we're a constant messy process of osmosis of things, aren't we, which is really extraordinary. You were talking there about slow trauma, which I think is interesting. COVID-19 is not slow trauma in the sense of how quickly it has happened to us. So Stephen's asking whether you think that COVID has either helped or hindered organisations in becoming more loving.
Helped, categorically, I think so. There are few times when we get the gift of a rupture like this, you know, and in a there's a beautiful quote, again I can't remember who it's from, but it says, when things fall apart, the hopelessly radical becomes common sense. So I absolutely think that there's a great podcast called The Great Humbling. So the Great Humbling that COVID is for us absolutely opens up the possibility of conversations that we've always shut down or not been open to before. So I really do think so. And if I make the link back to OD, for example, you know, after the origins of OD are said to be almost certainly kind of post World War II. Post World War, and the key metaphor there is poppies growing out of the soil. Now, the reason for that is that the soil was nurtured by blood and bone. Right? So from that rupture, from death, from destruction, came extraordinary things. Not just poppies, but the NHS, for example.
Absolutely.
You know, so many good things came from that. And it feels to me as if the ground is really fertile now for being bold to talk about love or spirit or compassion. Yeah. So.
And I think again that's a wonderful analogy with the healing metaphor that we had earlier. You know, that I certainly agree with you. It's been my experience that organisations are, you know, you can see these conversations flowering
Right.
And they do need to be nurtured very, very gently, because certainly as we're starting to talk about recovery, I mean, for a long time these days is like a week or 2 weeks. I certainly didn't want to write about recovery, because actually nobody knew what the hell recovery was, and we still don't know what recovery is, other than how and when are we going to get people back to work. And I think it's really interesting, this slow trauma that you talked about from the perspective of our workforces, i.e. our fellow humans. We're probably going to see changes and shifts around the question of our purpose and whether we want to do inner work. And that's going to take longer to actually start to populate and make itself known in the workplace. We talked just very beginning before the call that actually you've been massively busy over summer. And I wondered if, it is a lot of that around inner work that people are finding themselves in need of?
Some of it is. What increased, I think, for me over the summer was coaching work.
Yeah.
And I think I'm seeing, some themes for sure in that work around overwhelm, about compression, about a lack of freedom, actually. And I don't just mean, what do I mean? Freedom around being, locked into Zoom. But also people just this sense of compression, being, I'm going to say the word again, compressed. I can't find a better word. And I really fear for the sustainability of that. We can all do that short term, but I'm getting really curious about how we get out of those cages, because it doesn't feel sustainable.
No, it doesn't. And it's funny, I was talking to a colleague in the NHS yesterday, and I can't remember whether it's the Mental Health Foundation or one of the other charities, is basically anticipating that 5% of frontline medical workforce will suffer major psychological trauma as a consequence. And there's a bit of you that sort of says, okay, 5%, God, I'm amazed it's not more than 5%, but actually 5% of frontline medics, and that's not adding in social workers, care workers in homes, that is a profound amount of damage in people who actually we can't afford for them to be damaged, because we are not finished. Well, COVID is not finished with us yet. And I think we'll be living with the effects for a long time. It's really interesting. Helena, what's next for your work?
So one of the things that COVID did was made me a bit kind of braver, I suppose. I've been just planning to keep on writing and blogging and putting my newsletter out. And I knew I wanted to turn my work into a program of some sort. And obviously I wanted it to be face-to-face, and I thought it would be in a year's time. But actually what COVID did was say, oh, sod it, I'm just going to do something now. So the first cohort of a Leading from Love online 6-week program starts mid-September. And I'm going to keep building that. So I'll run that. I'll do a bigger version, an expanded version for the new year. I'm going to do a new piece of research, just going deeper into some of the new areas I've been exploring since the original piece of research. And my aim is to just have more people being more comfortable talking about love, so that organizations can become less harmful and potentially places of healing.
One of my, a declaration here is that I'm on your pilot program, which I'm very excited about. Indeed. I'm very excited about that. Secondly, what I want to say is that we'll support research, so absolutely that's important to us. Loved what you talked about in terms of continuing to talk and raise awareness, and I've certainly been very conscious that what I've seen growing over the last few months is more and more communities of connections that, had COVID not happened, I certainly would never have benefited from, and I really have benefited from extraordinary things. And I've got new friends who are on the call now, who I never would have met and have become profoundly dear to me, and I love them enormously, and that's really extraordinary. So we will help on that. Does anybody, we've got a minute to go, which just seems, it's really rude how quickly time goes when you're having fun. Does anybody else have a quick question for Helena? Whilst people might be thinking about it, I'm going to read a quote which I think sums up this beautiful lady and this wonderful session. And I'm pretty sure this is Lethem who's written this. When the day is done, it is important to remember that love is all that matters. Love is the most important thing in our lives. Love is what makes us human. Love is what makes life worth living. Love allows us to be connected, creating a world of loving kindness, sharing and growing together. And it is within everyone to commit and make happen. How amazing is that?
How beautiful is that? Yes, wow, beautiful.
Bless you, dear lady. Thank you so much for doing this for us. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I just want to let you know that we are webinar free next week. So it's bank holiday on Monday and we're going to have a week off. But our next two webinars are coming up on Wednesday, the 9th of September. I can't believe we're saying September already. That means Christmas is around the corner. But on the 9th of September, Amanda Oates, who is the director of, she's the executive director at Workforce at Merseycare, is joining us to talk about restorative just culture, and that's really interesting work. And Helena, if you can make that one, it would be wonderful.
That sounds good.
Yeah, and on Friday the 11th of September, gosh, what a date that always is, Lethem, it's World Suicide Prevention Day. Is it on Friday the 11th? Sorry, Thursday the 10th, but we're doing a webinar on the 11th. And we have somebody coming to talk to us about male suicide, aren't we?
It's called the co-authors of a book called Big Boys Don't Cry. And it's a specific emphasis on men's mental health, as men are kind of the biggest sufferers of suicidal thoughts and suicide in the UK.
Yeah, so that's also very closely related to love, is that one. So thank you, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed today, and we'll get the link out to this webinar on the website, which is www.ppma.org.uk, and you'll find these under the coronavirus hub that we have there. So have a good week, and hopefully we will see you at future sessions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you all.
You're very welcome.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.